Chapter 1. In the hidden chambers of the Great Library of Alexandria, before flames consumed centuries of accumulated wisdom, there existed a manuscript that even the most erudite librarians consulted with reverence and fear. It bore no seal of any known author, but initiates recognized in every line the unmistakable signature of Hermetic knowledge, that perfect synthesis between Greek philosophy, Egyptian mysticism, and Chaldean wisdom that could only be attributed to one source. Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great, master of masters, who was simultaneously the Egyptian god Thoth, scribe of the gods, and the Greek Hermes, messenger between worlds. This lost manuscript dealt with the most dangerous and powerful subject ever documented, the creative word. The word as a primordial force that does not describe reality but constructs it, that does not reflect the world but generates it. While the Hermetic texts that survive to our days, gathered in what we know as the Corpus Hermeticum, offer fragmentary glimpses of this doctrine, the lost manuscript contained the complete teaching, unveiled without protective allegories, nakedly exposing the mechanism by which human consciousness, expressing itself through directed speech, can literally alter the very fabric of manifestation. Who was Hermes Trismegistus? Really, the question has fascinated scholars for millennia. For some, he is a purely mythical figure, a personification of perennial wisdom that transcends historical individuals. For others, he represents a lineage of Egyptian initiates who preserved ancestral knowledge under this composite name. The truth, as often occurs with the deepest mysteries, probably contains both dimensions. The Egyptians knew him as Thoth, the sacred ibis, inventor of writing, measurer of time, recorder of souls in the judgment of the dead. The Greeks, upon encountering Thoth's teachings during their contacts with Egypt, recognized in him the Hermes of their own tradition, the messenger of the gods, the psychopomp who guides souls between worlds, the patron of magic and alchemy, and they added the epithet Trismegistus, thrice great, recognizing that this knowledge transcended both Egyptian and Greek wisdom, synthesizing something that was greater than the sum of both traditions. Chapter 2. What we know with certainty is that during the Hellenistic period, between the 2nd century before Christ and the 3rd century after Christ, numerous texts attributed to Hermes Trismegistus circulated in Alexandria. These treatises addressed subjects ranging from cosmology and the nature of God to practical alchemy and astrology. Some of these texts survived, preserved by Arab copyists and later rediscovered by European Renaissance scholars, where they caused an intellectual revolution comparable in impact to the rediscovery of classical Greek texts. The Poimandres, the first of the preserved Hermetic treatises, describes a cosmological vision where the universal mind generates creation through the Logos, the divine word. The Asclepius explores the nature of God, the cosmos, and the place of the human being as an intermediary between the divine and the material. Other treatises address spiritual regeneration, the nature of the supreme good, and the mysteries of Hermetic initiation. But the manuscript about the creative word, mentioned in oblique references in several of these preserved texts, was never included in the collections that reached us. Why? The reasons are multiple and revealing. First, this manuscript contained knowledge too powerful to be entrusted to anyone who could read. In the hands of people without appropriate spiritual development, without rigorous ethical training, the techniques described in the manuscript of the word could be used for manipulation, control, and destructive ends. Second, knowledge about the creative power of the word directly challenges authority structures that depend on keeping the masses in ignorance about their own power. A population that understands that their words literally create their reality cannot be controlled through propaganda, cannot be maintained in states of victimization, cannot be persuaded that they need external intermediaries to access the divine or to transform their circumstances. Third, and perhaps most important, from the perspective of the guardians of the mysteries, this knowledge can only be truly understood through direct experience, not through intellectual reading. Publishing it openly could result in many people acquiring theoretical information without developing the practical capacity to apply it, leading to frustration, disillusionment, or worse yet, to partial and distorted applications that could cause harm. For these reasons, knowledge about the creative word was transmitted exclusively through mystery schools, from master to disciple, in contexts where the spiritual preparation of the student could be carefully evaluated and where the teachings could be graduated according to the receptor's level of development. The Eleusinian mysteries, the Orphic cults, the Pythagorean colleges, the Gnostic schools, all preserved aspects of this fundamental Hermetic doctrine, though frequently wrapped in symbolism and allegory, that protected the knowledge from profanation while making it accessible to those with eyes to see and ears to hear. Chapter 3. When Christianity finally became the dominant religion of the Roman Empire, the open transmission of Hermetic doctrines became dangerous. The texts were dispersed, hidden, or destroyed. The mystery schools were closed by imperial decree. But the knowledge did not disappear completely. It was preserved in underground currents, in medieval alchemical traditions, in the teachings of Islamic Sufis, in Jewish Kabbalah, in secret societies like the Rosicrucians and Freemasons. And now, in our time, when quantum physics is discovering that the observer influences the observed, when neuroscience is revealing how language structures perception and experience, when we are beginning to understand scientifically what Hermeticists knew experientially for millennia, the moment has arrived for the knowledge of the creative word to emerge again, not as secret doctrine for a few initiates, but as wisdom available to all those prepared to receive it and apply it responsibly. The fundamental principle of the lost manuscript can be expressed simply, though its application requires a lifetime of dedicated practice. The word is not merely descriptive, but generative. When you pronounce a word with conscious intention, emotional coherence, and alignment with universal principles, you are not simply communicating information about reality. You are actively participating in the construction of that reality. You are exercising the power that the scriptures of all traditions attribute to divinity, the power to create through speech. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This declaration, which appears in the Gospel of John but echoes much older Hermetic teachings, is not abstract theology. It is a precise technical description of how creation functions at all levels. The Logos, the divine word, is the organizing principle that structures primordial chaos into ordered cosmos, and this same principle operates when human beings, made in the image of the divine, consciously use their capacity for speech. But we must clearly distinguish between ordinary word and conscious word. Most people speak throughout the day without awareness that each pronounced word is an act of creation, a seed planted in the field of manifestation that will eventually germinate and produce fruits according to its nature. They speak mechanically, repeating habitual phrases, expressing automatic reactions, verbally vomiting any thought or emotion that arises without conscious filter. Chapter 4. This ordinary speech, though technically possessing creative power because all verbal expression influences reality in some way, operates with minimal potency because it lacks the elements that amplify the power of the word: clear intention, sustained concentration, emotional coherence, and alignment with universal truths. It is like seed planted in poor soil, without adequate water, without sufficient sunlight. It may germinate weakly, but it will never produce the abundant harvest that is possible when all optimal conditions are met. The conscious word, in contrast, is pronounced only after the mind has clarified exactly what it desires to create, after the emotions have aligned to support that intention, rather than contradict it, and after connection has been established with the archetypal principles that govern manifestation at the specific level of reality being addressed. This conscious speech possesses power that may seem magical to untrained observers, but which is simply the skillful application of natural laws that operate consistently, though most of humanity remains ignorant of them. The Hermetic manuscript describes how sound, at its most fundamental level, is organized vibration. And matter, contrary to appearances, is not solid substance, but patterns of energy vibrating at specific frequencies. When you pronounce a word, you generate sound waves that are literally physical vibrations propagating through the air. These vibrations have the power to reorganize matter, as demonstrated by cymatics experiments, where specific frequencies create precise geometric patterns in sand or water. But beyond the direct physical effect of sound on matter, there exists a more subtle and more powerful dimension of verbal power. Each word carries not only sound frequency, but also meaning, and meaning exists on a mental plane that interpenetrates and governs the physical plane. When you pronounce a word, you not only produce physical vibrations, but also invoke the mental associations, emotional resonances, and archetypal correspondences that word carries in the collective mind of your culture and in your own individual psyche. This is why the same sound can have completely different effects depending on language and cultural context. The word paz in Spanish invokes a complete set of associations, memories, and emotional resonances that are different from those invoked by peace in English or shalom in Hebrew. Though all these sounds conceptually refer to the same state, the power of the word operates not only through its physical vibration, but also, and more potently, through its meaning and the networks of associations that meaning activates in consciousness. Chapter 5. This brings us to the first fundamental Hermetic principle that governs the power of the word: the all is mind, the universe is mental. This axiom, which appears at the beginning of the Kybalion and summarizes teachings contained in the most ancient Hermetic texts, establishes that fundamental reality is not matter, but consciousness. What we perceive as the objective physical world is in reality projection, condensation, or crystallization of mental patterns. If this is true, and modern quantum physics is providing increasingly convincing evidence that it is, then profound consequences follow for understanding the power of the word. Words, which are expressions of thoughts, which are in turn movements of consciousness, have direct power over the structure of what we call physical reality, because that reality is ultimately mental in its nature. When you pronounce an affirmation like, "I am healthy and vital," you are not merely describing a desired state or expressing a hopeful wish. You are participating in the mental creative process that structures your experience of health. The verbal declaration reinforces and solidifies a thought pattern that then influences your nervous system, your behavioral choices, and according to Hermetic teachings, also the more subtle levels of your being that eventually manifest as physical experience. But here we must introduce a crucial nuance that the Hermetic manuscript emphasizes repeatedly. The effectiveness of a verbal affirmation depends not only on pronouncing the correct words, but on the coherence between the conscious and subconscious levels of the mind. If you consciously affirm, "I am healthy," while subconsciously carrying deep beliefs that you are sick, destined to suffer, or that you do not deserve well-being, the conscious affirmation will have minimal power because it is being contradicted and sabotaged by the deeper programmings. For this reason, Hermetic work with the power of the word always begins with what traditions call self-knowledge. The rigorous exploration of subconscious beliefs, habitual thought patterns, and emotional programmings that operate below the threshold of ordinary consciousness. Only when these deeper levels have been examined, understood, and where necessary, reprogrammed, can the conscious word operate with its full power. Chapter 6. The second fundamental Hermetic principle that governs the power of the word is that of correspondence. As above, so below. As below, so above. As within, so without. As without, so within. This axiom establishes that there exists a relationship of reflection or analogy between different levels of reality. The patterns that operate on the mental plane are reflected in the emotional plane, which in turn are reflected in the physical plane. And crucially, the process functions in both directions. Changes at higher levels eventually manifest at lower levels, but also work performed at lower levels can influence the higher ones. Applied to the power of the word, this principle means that the words you pronounce on the physical audible plane are correspondences of thoughts that exist on the mental plane and of intentions that exist at even more subtle levels of your being. When there is perfect alignment between these levels, when the spoken word expresses exactly the conscious thought, which in turn faithfully expresses the soul's intention, the power of manifestation is maximized, but it also means that we can work in reverse. By consciously modifying our external speech, we can begin to influence our internal thought patterns. If you discipline your speech to eliminate all expression of limitation, victimization, or negativity, you will eventually discover that your thought patterns also begin to transform. The principle of correspondence ensures that sustained changes at one level will eventually produce corresponding changes at other levels. This explains why all serious spiritual traditions include speech disciplines as an essential part of their practice. The silence of Trappist monks, the vows of right speech in Buddhism, the prohibitions against gossip and slander in virtually all religions are not arbitrary moralism, but practical applications of the principle of correspondence. When you control your speech, you are indirectly but powerfully training and transforming your mind. The complete chain of creation, according to Hermetic doctrine, operates thus. At the highest level, there exists the universal mind, the all, which some call God. Within this universal mind arise ideas or archetypes, the perfect patterns of all things that can exist. These ideas are reflected downward into what we might call the cosmic mental plane, where they begin to acquire more definition and specificity. From the mental plane, these patterns descend to the astral or emotional plane, where they are charged with qualities of feeling, desire, and magnetic attraction. From the astral, they finally condense into the etheric plane, which is like the energetic template that organizes physical matter. And finally, they materialize completely in the physical plane, where they become perceptible to ordinary senses. Chapter 7. The human word, when used consciously, can intervene in this chain of creation at any point. In its most powerful form, the conscious word originates at the highest mental level of your being, your connection with the universal mind, and descends through all intermediate levels, gaining coherence and power at each stage until finally being physically pronounced with such a strong charge of intention, emotion, and visualization that its manifestation on the physical plane is practically inevitable. But even when you cannot consciously access these higher levels, you can begin where you are, on the physical plane, disciplining your ordinary speech. Each time you choose conscious words instead of reactive words, each time you speak from clear intention instead of from mechanical habit, you are strengthening your capacity to use the word as a tool of creation. Thoughts crystallize into words, and words solidify into deeds. This is another way of expressing the chain of creation from the Hermetic perspective. A thought maintained consistently will eventually seek expression in words, and words pronounced repeatedly, especially when charged with emotion and intention, eventually manifest as actions and circumstances in the physical world. This is not vague mysticism, but observation of how human psychology really functions, and, according to Hermetic philosophy, how the very structure of reality functions. Your internal world of thoughts and words is the matrix, the mold, that determines the form your external world of experiences and circumstances will take. Change the mold, and eventually you will change what is poured into it. But here we must address the question of responsibility, which is central to all authentic Hermetic teachings. If your words possess real power to create your reality, then you are fundamentally responsible for the circumstances of your life. Not completely, because you are also influenced by the words and thoughts of others, by the accumulated karma of past decisions, and by what Hermeticists would call destiny versus free will. But to a much greater extent than most people recognize, you are the architect of your experience through the habitual patterns of your thought and speech. This realization can be initially frightening or even guilt-inducing. If I have been creating my reality with my words, does it mean I am guilty of all the suffering I have experienced? But the Hermetic perspective is not of guilt, but of empowerment. Yes, your past words have contributed to creating your present circumstances, but this also means that your present words can create different future circumstances. You are not trapped by the past. You have the power to redirect your trajectory through the conscious use of the word beginning right now. Chapter 8. The third fundamental Hermetic principle that governs the power of the word is that of vibration. Nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. This axiom establishes that the difference between different states of matter, different levels of reality, and even between matter and spirit is only a matter of vibrational frequency. Everything in the universe is in constant vibratory motion, from subatomic particles to galaxies, from the most subtle thoughts to the densest physical objects. Words, as sound vibrations, operate directly according to this principle. Each word you pronounce has a specific vibrational frequency measurable in physical terms as sound waves. But beyond physical vibration, each word also carries a mental and emotional frequency, a pattern of subtle energy that resonates at levels of reality that transcend the purely physical. The ancient Hermetic masters, studying in the temples of Egypt, developed a sophisticated science of correspondences between specific sounds and different levels or planes of existence. They understood that certain sounds resonate primarily with the physical plane, facilitating material manifestation. Other sounds resonate with the emotional plane, capable of transforming states of feeling. And even more subtle sounds can resonate with the higher mental or spiritual planes, facilitating expansion of consciousness and spiritual realization. This Hermetic science of sound correspondences was partially preserved in various later traditions. Jewish Kabbalah developed an elaborate doctrine about the power of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, each considered not merely as a graphic symbol, but as a specific vibrational frequency with power to affect different aspects of creation. The letter Aleph, for example, represents the principle of primordial unity, and when pronounced consciously, can facilitate experiences of connection with the divine source. The Hindu tradition developed the science of mantra, recognizing that certain combinations of Sanskrit sounds possess intrinsic power that operates independently of whether the one pronouncing them understands their literal meaning. The mantra Om, or Aum, considered the primordial sound from which creation emerged, contains in its tripartite structure the representation of the entire cycle of manifestation, creation, preservation, and dissolution. Chapter 9. The ancient Egyptians, masters of Hermes Trismegistus in mythical tradition, used hieroglyphs that were simultaneously visual symbols and phonetic codes, understanding that the visual form and the spoken sound of each symbol were connected in their power to invoke the realities they represented. Pronouncing the name of an Egyptian god with the correct intonation was literally to invoke the presence and power of that divine principle. What unifies all these traditions is the recognition that sound is not neutral or arbitrary, but carries intrinsic qualities that correspond to different aspects of reality. And when we understand these correspondences, we can use specific sounds intentionally to attune ourselves to the levels of reality we wish to influence or experience. The lost Hermetic manuscript contained, according to the fragmentary references that survive, detailed tables of correspondences between specific sounds in different sacred languages and their characteristic effects on different levels of reality. It described which vowels resonate with which chakras or energetic centers of the human body. It explained which consonants facilitate which types of manifestation. and it provided precise instructions on how to combine sounds and sequences that maximize the creative power of the word. Although this specific manuscript was lost, fragments of this knowledge were preserved in the traditions already mentioned and can be partially reconstructed by any serious student willing to study these different currents of sapiential tradition comparatively. But more important than memorizing tables of correspondences is developing direct sensitivity to how different sounds affect your own energetic system and consciousness. This can be cultivated through simple practice. Pronounce different vowels: A, E, I, O, U, during extended periods while paying careful attention to what sensations, emotions, or states of consciousness emerge. Experiment with different tones, from low to high, noting how each tone seems to resonate in different regions of your body. Play with different consonants, observing which generate sensations of opening versus closing, expansion versus contraction, ascent versus descent. With time, you will develop your own personal vocabulary of sound correspondences, an experimental map of how different sounds affect your particular being. This personal map is more valuable than any table of correspondences you can memorize from books because it is based on your direct experience and can be used immediately in your practice of conscious word. Chapter 10. But we must also address a deeper dimension of the principle of vibration, the understanding that consciousness itself is vibration. The different states of consciousness, from dreamless deep sleep to mystical enlightenment, represent different vibrational frequencies of awareness, and the conscious word can be used as a tool to raise the vibrational frequency of your consciousness, to attune yourself to higher levels of perception and capacity. When you pronounce words that express elevated values, love, compassion, wisdom, gratitude, you are literally raising your consciential vibrational frequency. When you pronounce words that express lower frequencies, hatred, fear, resentment, guilt, you are lowering your vibration. This is not moralism, but physics of consciousness. Different emotional and mental states are literally different frequencies, and the words you choose to pronounce directly influence at what frequency you operate. Advanced Hermetic practice of the conscious word involves learning to deliberately modulate your vibrational frequency through the strategic use of specific words and sounds. If you need to focus on practical material tasks, you can use words and tones that anchor you in denser frequencies that facilitate physical manifestation. If you need to access creative insight or spiritual guidance, you can use words and tones that elevate your vibration toward frequencies where these resources become accessible. This is the art that true Hermetic masters mastered: the capacity to consciously navigate the complete spectrum of vibrational frequencies, from the densest to the most subtle, using the word as a vehicle of transition between states. They were not trapped in any particular frequency. They could modulate their vibration according to what each situation required. And here we arrive at a point that the lost manuscript apparently emphasized with particular insistence: that silence is not the absence of the word, but its matrix, its source, and its culmination. Before any word is pronounced, there exists the silence charged with potential, where all possible words exist as non-actualized possibilities. After the word is pronounced and has fulfilled its creative function, it returns to silence, the receptive matrix where its effects are integrated and stabilized. The Hermetic adept learns to move fluidly between word and silence, knowing when to speak and when to be silent, understanding that conscious silence amplifies the power of the words that precede and follow it. This is not the empty silence of one who has nothing to say, but the full silence of one who recognizes that there are moments when speech would interfere with processes that must unfold in quietude. Chapter 11. Before concluding this first volume of teachings on the creative word, we must address the question of why this knowledge was veiled in symbolism and allegory. The Hermetic texts that survived rarely expressed their teachings directly. Instead, they use dialogues between master and disciple, elaborate cosmological visions, myths about gods ascending and descending, and language that can be interpreted on multiple levels according to the reader's sophistication. This was not malicious obfuscation designed to keep the masses in ignorance, though it certainly had that effect as well. It was practical and pedagogical necessity. Knowledge about the power of the word can only be truly understood through direct experience, not through theoretical explanation. The symbols and allegories functioned as mnemonic and contemplative devices that guided the student toward experiences that would reveal the direct meaning, rather than simply providing information that could be memorized without genuine understanding. Furthermore, symbolic language possesses a self-selective quality. Those who are not prepared for the knowledge find the symbols inscrutable or interpret them superficially, and thus protect themselves from prematurely accessing power they would not be equipped to handle responsibly. But those who are prepared find that the symbols speak directly to deep levels of their being, revealing meanings that transcend what could be communicated through direct, literal language. The Hermetic texts were also veiled out of necessity for survival during periods when religious and political authorities actively persecuted esoteric traditions. A text that spoke too openly about the power of individuals to create reality through conscious word would have been immediately destroyed and its author executed for heresy or sedition. But a text that expressed the same ideas in the language of cosmological myths could circulate with relative safety, appearing as harmless philosophical speculation to uninitiated censors. And finally, the veil of symbolism served to remind the student that these teachings require active interpretation, personal work, disciplined application. They are not passive information you can simply absorb intellectually. They are maps you must follow through practice to reach the treasure they indicate. The effort required to decipher the symbolism is part of the preparation process that qualifies the student to receive the true knowledge. In our time, when the need for protective veils has diminished, but the need for deep understanding remains as crucial as ever, we can speak more directly about the power of the creative word. But we must always remember that intellectual understanding of these principles is only the first step. True mastery requires dedicated practice, personal experimentation, and the willingness to transform not only your speech, but your entire way of existing in the world. The mystery schools that preserved this knowledge throughout the centuries were not social clubs for people interested in the esoteric. They were rigorous training centers where students spent years, sometimes decades, developing the internal capacities necessary to consciously use the power of the word. They began with work on themselves, impartial observation of their own thought and speech patterns, identification of the subconscious programmings that controlled their expression, and cultivation of the capacity to maintain focused intention for extended periods. Only after having established a basic level of mastery over their internal processes were they introduced to specific techniques of working with the conscious word. And even then, the training proceeded gradually, beginning with simple applications and progressing toward more powerful forms only when the student had demonstrated capacity to handle each level of power responsibly. This gradual approach was not arbitrary, but based on deep understanding of human psychology and spiritual realities. Giving someone access to significant power before they have developed proportionate wisdom and ethics is a recipe for disaster, not only for that person, but potentially for everyone in their sphere of influence. The power of the conscious word, like all genuine power, must be balanced with responsibility, compassion, and understanding of the interconnections that make no action truly isolated or private. The Hermetic masters also understood that work with the conscious word was not an isolated practice, but part of an integral system of spiritual development. The capacity to effectively use the power of the word depended on having cultivated other capacities: deep mental concentration, emotional stability, purification of the energetic field, and connection with higher aspects of being. Working with the word without these foundations would be like trying to build the roof of a building before having established its foundations. For this reason, Hermetic teachings always emphasized what they called the work on oneself as a prerequisite for any magical or manifestational practice. You had to first know yourself, clean your own inner temple, before you could effectively use that temple as a channel for creative forces. This sequence was non-negotiable. Attempting to skip it inevitably resulted in frustration or worse consequences. In the coming chapters, we will explore the specific techniques that Hermetic adepts developed for working consciously with the power of the word. But everything that follows must be understood in the context of the fundamental principles we have established here: that the word is primordial creative force, that it operates according to precise laws of mentalism, correspondence, and vibration, and that its effective use requires not only technical knowledge, but also deep spiritual development. The path of the Hermetic adept is neither easy nor quick. It requires sustained dedication, radical honesty with oneself, and willingness to fundamentally transform how you relate to reality. But the fruits of this path are incomparable. The capacity to consciously participate in the continuous creation of the universe, to become co-creator with the divine principle, instead of being a passive victim of apparently external circumstances. Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great Master of Masters, left this legacy not as historical relic to be admired from safe distance, but as living map to be followed by all those with sufficient courage to reclaim their inheritance as creative beings made in the image of the divine. The creative word is not power reserved for distant gods or impossibly elevated saints. It is your birthright, your natural capacity, waiting to be recognized, cultivated, and used for the good of yourself and all creation. The question now is not whether you possess this power, because you possess it by the simple fact of being conscious and capable of speech. The question is whether you will choose to use it consciously, responsibly, wisely. Whether you will develop the internal capacities necessary to handle this power without being corrupted by it. Whether you will dedicate the time and effort required to transform yourself from unconscious speaker into master of the word. The lost manuscript of Hermes Trismegistus on the creative word may be physically gone, consumed by the flames that destroyed the Library of Alexandria, or hidden in some inaccessible place. But its essence remains available to all those who seek with sincerity, because the truths it contained are not information that can be lost, but eternal principles that operate consistently regardless of whether we understand or recognize them. Your words are creating your reality in every moment, consciously or unconsciously, skillfully or clumsily, constructively or destructively. This is the fundamental Hermetic truth that no destruction of texts can erase. The only question that remains is whether you will take conscious control of this creative process that is already occurring, or whether you will continue speaking mechanically, planting random seeds in the garden of your life, and then being surprised by the strange and frequently unwanted plants that grow. The path of the Hermetic adept invites you to become a conscious gardener, carefully choosing each verbal seed you plant, cultivating the soil of your consciousness so that it is receptive to the plants you truly wish to cultivate, and eventually harvesting fruits of a life lived in alignment with your true nature and highest purpose. The teachings continue in the next volume, where we will explore the 7 Hermetic principles in their specific application to the art of the creative word, and where we will share concrete techniques you can begin practicing immediately. But for now, consider deeply what you have read. Allow these fundamental principles to settle into your understanding. Observe your own speech during the coming days with new awareness, and prepare for the deeper work that will come. The word awaits you, as dormant power waiting to be awakened, as instrument waiting to be played by skillful musician, as tool waiting to be used by master craftsman. Hermes Trismegistus has bequeathed you the keys. Now it corresponds to you to open the doors and enter the temple of your own creative power. May the divine logos that speaks universes into existence recognize itself in you. May the word that was in the beginning and will be in the end guide you in the conscious use of your own capacity for speech, and may your word become an instrument of creation, healing, and elevation for yourself and for all those touched by the power of your consciously directed words. Thus ends the first volume of the teachings on the creative word, preserved in the memory of the mystery schools, and now offered to all those with eyes to see, ears to hear, and hearts open to receive the perennial wisdom of Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great master of antiquity, whose teachings remain as relevant and powerful today as they were when first transmitted in the sacred temples of Egypt millennia ago. The seal is broken. The knowledge is revealed. The power is available. Only your choice remains. Will you be an unconscious speaker or a conscious master of the creative word? The answer will determine not only your individual destiny, but also your contribution to the collective awakening of a humanity that is finally remembering its true nature as individualized expressions of the divine logos, the eternal word that creates and sustains all manifestation. Chapter 12, the first Hermetic principle, that of mentalism, establishes that everything that exists is a manifestation of the universal mind. The Kabbalion expresses it with meridian clarity. The all is mind, the universe is mental. This declaration is not a poetic metaphor, nor a philosophical speculation, but the cornerstone upon which the entire architecture of Hermetic knowledge is built. And when we apply this principle to the power of the word, we discover something extraordinary. Each word we pronounce is, in essence, a direct projection of divine thought flowing through our individual consciousness. Hermes Trismegistus taught that the human being occupies a unique position in the cosmos. We are not simply creatures subjected to the laws of the universe, but conscious co-creators, intermediaries between the world of pure ideas and the plane of material manifestation. This intermediate position confers upon us tremendous power and even greater responsibility. When we understand that our words are not mere sound emissions, but vehicles of divine thought manifesting in the physical world, our entire relationship with language is radically transformed. The lost manuscript of Hermes on the Word dedicates extensive passages to explaining the chain of transmission that goes from the universal mind to the pronounced word. At the highest level exists the nous, the divine mind, origin of all idea and all form. This supreme mind does not remain static nor enclosed in itself, but constantly projects itself outward, generating the archetypes, the primordial patterns that will then manifest in innumerable forms at the lower levels of reality. These archetypes are pure ideas, perfect, timeless. The human being, according to Hermetic doctrine, has the capacity to attune their individual mind with this universal mind. Through contemplation, meditation, and inner purification, we can elevate our consciousness to perceive, even if tenuously, these divine archetypes. And here is where the word acquires its true power. When a person has managed to connect their mind with a specific archetype and then pronounces words that express that archetype, they are not simply sharing a personal opinion or transmitting ordinary information. They are acting as a channel through which divine thought descends toward the material plane. This understanding completely changes our way of speaking. Most people use words automatically, mechanically, without conscious reflection on the origin of their thoughts, nor on the impact of their expressions. They speak by habit, by imitation, by emotional reaction. Their words lack creative power because they are not backed by a conscious connection with the higher levels of their being. They are like untuned musical instruments that produce noise instead of harmonious music. The Hermetic adept, on the contrary, develops what ancient texts call the charged word, the word impregnated with consciousness. Before speaking, this initiate directs their attention inward, toward that silent space where their individual mind meets the universal mind. From that point of connection, they allow a clear, luminous thought to arise, aligned with archetypal truth. Only then do they pronounce words, but these words are no longer theirs in the ordinary sense. They are verbal manifestations of the Logos itself, of the organizing principle of the cosmos. The Hermetic texts describe this process with a powerful image. Divine thought is like sunlight, pure and undifferentiated. The human mind is like a prism that refracts that light. Words are the specific colors that emerge from that refraction. If the prism of our mind is clean, polished, correctly oriented, the colors it produces will be brilliant, harmonious, revealing of the nature of the original light. If the prism is dirty, cracked, poorly positioned, the colors will be murky, distorted, incapable of transmitting the purity of their source. The work of the Hermetic student consists precisely in polishing the prism of their mind. This is achieved through specific practices that the manuscripts detail with precision. The first is constant observation of one's own thoughts. The initiate learns to witness the flow of their mental activity without identifying with each thought that appears. They discover that there are thoughts that arise from their lower nature, from their fears, selfish desires, and social conditionings. And there are thoughts that descend from their higher nature, reflections of universal truths, impulses toward beauty, goodness, and wisdom. With time, through this patient and sustained observation, the practitioner develops the capacity to discern between both use of the word. They recommended to their students to spend time by the ocean, observing the rhythm of the waves, advance and retreat, advance and retreat. This basic rhythm of nature had to be incorporated into speech. Just as the ocean does not strike the shore with constant force, but alternates surges with retreats, so powerful speech alternates moments of active pronunciation with moments of receptive silence. The principle of rhythm applied to the word teaches us patience and precision. It frees us from the compulsion to speak impulsively, from the need to fill every silence with words. It reveals to us that there is a correct time for each word, and that waiting for that correct time exponentially multiplies the power of what we say. In a world where communication has become increasingly fast, more impulsive, more constant, the return to the Hermetic wisdom of conscious rhythm is perhaps more necessary than ever. Chapter 17, the sixth Hermetic principle, that of cause and effect, establishes that every cause has its effect, every effect has its cause, everything happens according to law. Chance is but the name given to unrecognized law. This principle denies the existence of chance and affirms that everything that occurs in the universe is the result of specific causes operating through precise laws. When we apply the principle of cause and effect to the study of the word, we arrive at an understanding that can be both liberating and terrifying. Each word we pronounce is a cause that will inevitably produce effects. There are no neutral words. There are no words that evaporate without leaving a trace. Each syllable that leaves our mouth sets in motion chains of consequences that propagate through multiple planes of reality. The manuscript of Hermes is particularly emphatic about this point. It dedicates entire sections to what it calls the law of verbal responsibility. It explains that most people speak unconsciously without reflecting on the consequences of their words, and then are surprised when their life fills with chaos, conflict, and suffering. They do not understand that it is they themselves, through their careless speech, who have sown the seeds of their own difficulties. The principle operates on multiple levels simultaneously. At the most obvious and material level, our words produce direct social and relational effects. If we speak with kindness, we generate goodwill. If we speak with cruelty, we generate resentment. If we make promises and keep them, we generate trust. If we make promises and break them, we generate mistrust. These effects are predictable and clearly traceable. Most people recognize at least this level of verbal cause and effect. But the Hermetic manuscript goes much further. It teaches that words produce effects at levels that most people never consider. On the energetic or etheric plane, each word we pronounce creates what the texts call thought forms. These are real energetic structures, though invisible to ordinary physical perception, that have objective existence and produce measurable effects. When we pronounce words of love, we generate luminous, expansive thought forms that float in our auric field and in the environment surrounding us. These forms attract harmonic experiences and people. When we pronounce words of hatred or resentment, we create dense, dark, contractive thought forms that also float in our field and environment, attracting discordant circumstances and people. It is not magic in the sense of violating natural laws, but the operation of natural laws on planes we normally do not perceive. The manuscript describes that each thought form created by our words has a kind of life of its own. It persists on the etheric plane for a time proportional to the emotional energy with which it was created. A word said casually, without emotional charge, creates a weak form that dissipates quickly. A word pronounced with intense emotion, whether positive or negative, creates a powerful form that can persist for days, weeks, even years. These thought forms do not remain static. According to their nature, they move, seek, attract. Positive forms seek positive experiences and entities with which to resonate. Negative forms seek the negative. This is the hidden foundation of what is popularly called the law of attraction. We do not directly attract things and experiences with our thoughts, but rather, our thoughts and words create energetic forms that then magnetically attract corresponding experiences. This explains why people who constantly speak of illness tend to become sick, why those who speak of scarcity experience poverty, why those who speak of betrayal are betrayed. It is not coincidence nor bad luck. It is the precise operation of cause and effect on the energetic plane. The manuscript warns that this principle operates without exceptions. We cannot speak negatively throughout the day and then make a brief positive affirmation expecting it to neutralize everything previous. The balance of causes and effects is exact. Every word counts. Every declaration adds to or subtracts from the total of our energetic creations. This is why the Hermetic Masters were so careful with their speech, so selective with their words. They knew that each word was an investment that would inevitably produce dividends. But the principle of cause and effect also offers us tremendous power. If every word is a cause, then by controlling our words, we control the causes we are setting in motion. We become conscious architects of our future instead of unconscious victims of our past. The manuscript teaches specific techniques for what it calls conscious verbal causation. The first technique is what the texts call the retroactive decree. This consists of using the present power of the word to redefine the meaning of past events. We cannot change what happened, but we can change what it means, and by changing its meaning, we change the effects it continues to produce in the present. For example, if someone has experienced a betrayal and continues speaking of it as the worst thing that ever happened to me, that verbal definition keeps the wound active, continuing to generate effects of mistrust, bitterness, and isolation. But if that same person, through conscious work with the word, begins to speak of the same event as the experience that taught me discernment and led me to value authentic relationships, they are retroactively changing the causal chain. The past event becomes a different kind of cause, now generating effects of wisdom, gratitude, and deeper capacity for connection. This is not denial nor superficial positive thinking. It is recognition that the meaning we assign through words to our experiences determines what effects those experiences continue producing. The second technique is what the manuscript calls the preventive word. This consists of using the word consciously before acting to establish clear intentions and to invoke the principles we wish to govern our actions. Before entering a difficult conversation, the adept pronounces internally or vocally words that define the quality of consciousness they wish to bring to that interaction. I enter this conversation with the intention of understanding and being understood, with openness to truth wherever it leads, with compassion for myself and the other. These words are not empty formulas. They are causes that shape the energetic field of the upcoming interaction. They attract archetypal forces that support those qualities. They align the speaker's subconscious with the conscious intention. The conversation that follows will be markedly different from one entered without this conscious verbal preparation. The third technique is the corrective word. This consists of immediately correcting ourselves when we catch ourselves speaking in ways that contradict our highest intentions. If you say something negative about someone and then become aware of it, you don't just remain silent, you verbally correct it. Actually, I realize I'm judging. The truth is, I don't fully understand their situation. This immediate correction prevents the negative thought form from fully forming and sends a signal to your subconscious that you are serious about transforming your speech patterns. The manuscript emphasizes that these techniques only work when accompanied by genuine inner work. You cannot verbally decree one thing while internally believing another and expect the verbal decree to prevail. The principle of cause and effect is impartial. It responds to the total causal force you are generating, which includes your thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and words. The words have power, but their power is maximized when aligned with all other levels of your being. The texts also warn about what they call karmic words, words that set in motion long-term causal chains with consequences that may not manifest for years or even lifetimes. Vows, curses, oaths, and decrees pronounced with intense emotion and full conviction create extremely powerful thought forms that can persist for decades. This is why all serious spiritual traditions emphasize extreme care with sacred vows, and why breaking such vows is considered so serious, not because of arbitrary rules, but because of the real causal disruption it creates. The Hermetic understanding of verbal cause and effect also includes the recognition that we are affected not only by our own words, but by the words of others directed at us. When someone speaks negatively about us, they are creating thought forms that seek to attach to our energetic field. If we are unaware and our field is weak or chaotic, these forms can penetrate and begin producing effects. We may start to feel the way they described us, to act in ways that confirm their negative assessment. But the manuscript teaches that we have power to reject these incoming verbal causes. When we become aware that someone has spoken negatively about us, we can consciously refuse to accept their words as truth about us. We can verbally affirm our own truth. I am not what they say. I know who I am. This conscious rejection, when done with conviction, creates an energetic boundary that prevents foreign thought forms from penetrating our field. Similarly, when we speak positively about others, we create thought forms that offer support and blessing to them. This is the true basis of prayer and blessing, conscious use of the word to generate positive causes for others. And just as negative words require the receiver's unconscious agreement to have full effect, positive words are amplified when the receiver is open to receiving them. The principle of cause and effect applied to the word ultimately teaches us complete responsibility for our verbal expression. Every word is a seed we plant. Some seeds will sprout quickly, others will lie dormant for long periods before germinating. But germinate they will, producing harvests that correspond exactly to their nature. The Hermetic adept becomes a conscious farmer of words, carefully selecting each seed, preparing the soil of consciousness to receive them, and patiently tending the growth that follows. Chapter 18, the seventh Hermetic principle, that of gender, establishes that gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principle. This principle does not refer to biological sex, but to two complementary modalities of energy present at all levels of existence, the active projective and the receptive gestative. Applied to the word, this principle teaches us that the complete power of the word only manifests when there exists balance between speaking and listening, between pronouncing and receiving, between the active word and the receptive silence. The manuscript explains that the masculine word is the word pronounced outward, the declaration, the decree, the teaching given. The feminine word is deep listening, the silence that receives, the space that allows the word to germinate. Most people develop only one of these poles. Some speak constantly without truly listening, projecting without receiving. Others listen passively without ever pronouncing their own truth. Both extremes are incomplete and lack real power. The Hermetic adept cultivates both aspects with equal dedication. They learn both the art of the powerful word and the art of the fertile silence. Only in this dynamic balance does the complete Logos manifest. The manuscript dedicates entire chapters to what it calls the art of sacred listening. It explains that listening is not a passive act, but an active one, requiring as much skill and discipline as speaking. When you listen to someone with full presence, without planning your response, without judging, without filtering their words through your own prejudices and needs, you create a sacred space. In that space, the other person's words can land with full force, can reveal meanings that were perhaps hidden even to the speaker themselves. This sacred listening is a form of service, a gift you offer to the other. But it is also a gift to yourself, because in truly listening, you learn. You receive information, perspectives, energies that enrich and expand you. The Hermetic texts describe how the greatest masters were the greatest listeners. They spoke rarely, but when they spoke, their words carried the distilled wisdom of countless hours of deep listening to students, to nature, to the silence, to the divine voice within. The principle of gender also applies to the internal process of speaking. Before any word is spoken externally, there must first be an internal gestation period. The masculine aspect of your consciousness conceives an idea, a clear intention, but this idea must then be received by the feminine aspect, the womb of silence within you, where it is held, refined, allowed to mature. Only after this internal gestation is complete should the word be born, pronounced externally. When you skip this internal gestation, when you speak impulsively, without allowing the silence to work upon your thought, your words emerge premature, weak, often contradictory to your deeper truth. The manuscript uses the metaphor of pregnancy. Just as a child needs 9 months in the womb to develop fully, important words need time in the womb of internal silence to achieve their full potency. The text describes specific practices for cultivating this balance of gender in speech. One exercise is the discipline of sacred postponement. When you feel the urge to speak about something important, instead of immediately expressing it, you consciously hold it in silence for a period. You might wait an hour, a day, or longer, depending on the importance of what you wish to say. During this waiting period, you observe how the thought evolves, refines, sometimes transforms completely. Often what seemed urgently important to say reveals itself as unnecessary once you've given it time in the silence. Another practice is the rhythm of word and silence in dialogue. This consists of deliberately introducing pauses into your conversations, moments where neither person speaks, but both remain present. After someone shares something significant, instead of immediately responding, you pause. You let their words settle, you feel them, you receive them fully. Only then do you respond, and your response comes from a deeper place, informed by the feminine reception before the masculine expression. The manuscript also teaches about the gender balance in teaching and learning. The true teacher embodies both masculine and feminine aspects. They project knowledge outward, masculine, but also create receptive space for the student to discover truth themselves, feminine. The true student also embodies both aspects. They receptively absorb teaching, feminine, but also actively question, experiment, and eventually articulate their own understanding, masculine. The Hermetic tradition recognizes that different individuals may have natural inclinations toward one pole or the other. Some people are naturally more verbal, outgoing, active in expression. Others are naturally more quiet, introverted, receptive. Neither tendency is superior. The work is not to deny your natural inclination, but to develop its complement. The natural speaker must learn the power of silence. The natural listener must learn to give voice to their inner truth. Only in developing both poles do you become whole. The manuscript includes a fascinating section on what it calls the androgynous word, the word that perfectly balances masculine and feminine qualities. This is the word of the true sage, spoken from a state of internal unity. Such words carry both the penetrating clarity of the masculine principle and the nurturing wisdom of the feminine principle. They can pierce illusion while simultaneously holding the listener in compassion. They can challenge while supporting, correct while loving, reveal truth while honoring mystery. The great mantras and sacred words of all traditions possess this androgynous quality. The sound Om, for instance, contains in its structure both the outward creative thrust, the O sound that opens, and the inward return to source, the M sound that closes. This balance makes it a complete word, a perfect word, a word that encompasses the full cycle of manifestation and return. The principle of gender applied to the word also helps us understand the power of invocation and evocation. Invocation is the feminine aspect of sacred speech. We create an internal receptive space and call divine forces, archetypes, higher wisdom to descend into us. Evocation is the masculine aspect. We project power outward, calling forth, manifesting, creating effects in the external world. The complete magical or spiritual work requires both. We invoke to receive power and wisdom. We evoke to express that power and wisdom in manifest form. The manuscript warns against the dangers of gender imbalance in spiritual work. Those who develop only the masculine aspect become domineering, forceful, impressive, but exhausting. Their words may have short-term impact, but lack the sustaining power of deep wisdom. They burn bright, but burn out. Those who develop only the feminine aspect become passive, receptive to the point of being directionless, full of potential that never actualizes. They may be wise but ineffective, knowing much but manifesting little. The path of the Hermetic adept is the path of sacred marriage, the internal union of masculine and feminine principles. This is the true meaning of the alchemical marriage depicted in ancient texts. Not a union with an external partner, though that may reflect it, but the integration of the active and receptive, speaking and listening, word and silence within your own being. When this internal marriage is achieved, your speech becomes truly powerful, truly creative, truly divine. The manuscript concludes its teaching on the principle of gender with a meditation exercise. You are instructed to sit in silence and become aware of the breath. The inhalation is the feminine principle, receptive, drawing in, absorbing. The exhalation is the masculine principle, active, projecting out, expressing. You observe how these two aspects alternate in perfect rhythm, neither trying to dominate, each making space for the other. This breath becomes a teacher, showing you the natural balance you must embody in your use of the word. Then you are instructed to internally pronounce a sacred word or phrase on the exhalation, masculine, and to receive its vibration in the silence that follows, feminine. You continue this practice, speaking and receiving, projecting and absorbing, until you feel the two aspects merging, until you experience yourself as both speaker and listener, both creator and creation, both the word and the silence from which it emerges and to which it returns. Chapter 19. Having explored the 7 Hermetic principles in their application to the word, the manuscript turns to specific techniques that the ancient adepts developed for working practically with the creative power of speech. These techniques are not theoretical knowledge but practical tools, tested and refined over millennia of application. The first technique is called the morning word. The manuscript teaches that the first words you speak upon waking have disproportionate power to shape the entire day. This is because in the transition from sleep to waking, Consciousness is particularly fluid. The boundary between subconscious and conscious is thin, and the energetic field is fresh and impressionable. The words you speak in this state act as seeds that determine what will grow throughout the day. The practice is simple, but requires discipline. Upon waking, before speaking to anyone else, before checking messages or news, you take a few moments to center yourself. You breathe consciously. You feel your presence in your body. You remember who you truly are beyond all the roles and identities you play. Then you pronounce your morning word, a single word or short phrase that captures the quality you wish to embody during the coming day. This might be peace, or gratitude, or clarity, or courage, or whatever quality you most need or wish to cultivate. You pronounce this word not casually, but with full consciousness, feeling it resonate in your body, visualizing it suffusing your entire being, setting clear intention that this quality will inform all your actions and interactions throughout the day. This morning word becomes like a tuning fork for your entire day, a vibrational reference point to which you can return whenever you notice yourself drifting off course. The second technique is the evening review. Each night before sleep, you review your day specifically focusing on your use of words. You recall what you said, how you said it, what effects your words produced. You do this without judgment, but with honest observation. Where did you speak consciously from your highest self? Where did you speak reactively, unconsciously, perhaps causing harm? Where did you speak truth? Where did you speak from fear or ego? This evening review serves multiple purposes. It develops your awareness of your speech patterns. It allows you to consciously process and release the day's verbal interactions rather than carrying them into sleep. It helps you identify patterns that need to change, and crucially, it provides data for setting your intention for the following day. If you notice you spoke harshly several times, tomorrow's morning word might be gentleness. If you notice you remained silent when you should have spoken truth, tomorrow's word might be courage. The third technique is the sacred no. This is the practice of radical selectivity in speech, the discipline of saying no to all verbal expression that does not serve your highest purpose. The manuscript explains that most people waste enormous amounts of energy in unnecessary speech, gossip, complaining, empty chatter, reactive arguments. Each of these verbal expenditures dissipates your power, scatters your energy, weakens your capacity for truly creative speech. The sacred no consists of becoming aware of these verbal temptations and consciously declining them. When you feel the urge to complain, you notice it, but choose silence instead. When you are invited into gossip, you change the subject or excuse yourself. When someone provokes you into argument, you recognize the provocation, but refuse to take the bait. This is not repression, but conscious choice. Not weakness, but tremendous strength. By saying no to unconscious speech, you conserve energy. That energy accumulates, like water behind a dam, and when you do speak, when you speak consciously from intention, that accumulated energy flows into your words, giving them exceptional power. The person who speaks constantly has weak words. The person who speaks rarely but consciously has words that move mountains. The fourth technique is the blessing word. This practice consists of consciously using speech to bless, to speak well of others, to acknowledge beauty, to express gratitude, to recognize the divine in all things. The manuscript explains that blessing is not wishful thinking, but actual transmission of positive energy through the vehicle of words. When you bless someone, you are not just expressing a hope that they will be well. You are actively contributing to their wellness through the creative power of your word. The practice can be formal or informal. Formally, you might set aside time each day to verbally bless specific people, situations, or aspects of your life. I bless my family. I bless my work. I bless my body. I bless my challenges as opportunities for growth. Informally, you make blessing a constant habit throughout the day. You see someone and silently or vocally think or say, I bless you. You encounter a difficult situation and say, I bless this situation and trust it is serving my evolution. The power of the blessing word lies partly in what it does for others, creating positive thought forms that support them, but it lies equally in what it does for you. Each blessing you speak elevates your own vibration, trains your consciousness to perceive the positive, accumulates positive karma, and gradually transforms you into a person whose very presence is a blessing, whose words carry healing power. The fifth technique is the decree. This is the most powerful and therefore most carefully guarded of the Hermetic verbal techniques. A decree is not a wish or hope or prayer in the ordinary sense. It is a direct command to reality, a word spoken with such absolute conviction, such total alignment of all levels of being, such connection with divine authority, that manifestation is inevitable. The manuscript emphasizes that the capacity to decree effectively requires extensive preparation. You cannot simply pronounce decrees and expect them to work. You must first have developed the qualities already discussed: purity of intention, emotional coherence, mental clarity, connection with higher consciousness. You must have learned to still your doubts, to focus your will with laser intensity, to speak from a place deeper than ego. When these conditions are met, the decree is pronounced in a specific way. First, you enter a state of deep concentration, gathering all your energy to a single point. Then you clearly visualize what you are decreeing, seeing it as already accomplished in the mental realm. Then you feel the emotion of its fulfillment, generating the magnetic power that will draw the manifestation. Finally, you speak the decree. I am desired state, or it is desired reality. The decree is always in present tense, never future. You do not say I will be, or I hope to be, but I am. This is because in the higher realms where the decree is actually operating, time as we know it does not exist. All possibilities exist now. The decree selects which possibility will manifest in physical reality. The more you can genuinely feel and know your decree as already true in higher dimensions, the more powerfully it will manifest in lower dimensions. The manuscript includes extensive warnings about the decree. It must never be used for selfish purposes that violate the free will of others or that contradict universal harmony. The karmic consequences of misusing the decree are severe. It must never be used frivolously or experimentally, as this dissipates its power, and it must only be used when you are willing to accept complete responsibility for the results and are prepared to take all necessary action to support the manifestation. The sixth technique is the word fast. Just as fasting from food cleanses and strengthens the physical body, fasting from words cleanses and strengthens the verbal body. This practice consists of voluntarily entering into complete silence for an extended period. A day, a weekend, a week, or longer for advanced practitioners. During a word fast, you not only refrain from speaking, but also, as much as possible, from writing or any other form of verbal communication. You discover how much of your consciousness is habitually engaged in verbal activity, either actual speech or internal dialogue. In the silence, you begin to perceive dimensions of reality that are normally obscured by the constant noise of words. You hear the subtle voices, intuition, higher guidance, the voice of nature, the wisdom of your own soul speaking in languages beyond words. The word fast also makes you keenly aware of how automatic most speech is. When the discipline prevents you from speaking, you notice countless moments where you would have spoken unconsciously, reactively, unnecessarily. You see how much energy you normally waste in verbal expression, and when you emerge from the fast and begin speaking again, you speak differently. Your words are more carefully chosen, more conscious, more powerful. You have experimented directly with the principle that silence is the source and amplifier of the word's power. The manuscript recommends undertaking a word fast at least once per season, ideally aligned with natural transitions like solstices and equinoxes. These are times when cosmic energies shift, and the practice of verbal silence allows you to attune more perfectly with these shifts. Some adepts maintain a practice of 1 day of complete silence per week, usually the same day each week, creating a reliable rhythm of word and silence. The 7th technique is the mantra practice. While this practice is most developed in the Hindu and Buddhist traditions, the manuscript reveals that it was originally a Hermetic technique that spread eastward in ancient times. A mantra is a specific sound or phrase that is repeated continuously, either vocally or mentally, for extended periods. The power of the mantra lies not in its literal meaning, but in its vibrational effect. The manuscript explains that certain sound combinations, particularly in Sanskrit, but also in Hebrew, ancient Egyptian, and other sacred languages, were designed by enlightened beings to produce specific effects on consciousness and reality. When these sounds are repeated with proper pronunciation and intention, they gradually restructure your energetic field, purify your consciousness, and attune you with the archetypal forces the sounds represent. The practice is simple in form, but profound in effect. You choose a mantra, ideally one given to you by a qualified teacher, or one that resonates deeply when you first encounter it. Traditional mantras include Om, Om Mani, Padme, Hum, Soham, and various names of divine beings. You set aside time daily, ideally the same time each day, to repeat this mantra. You might repeat it a specific number of times, traditionally 108 or multiples thereof, using a mala or prayer beads to count. As you repeat the mantra, you maintain awareness of its sound and vibration. You're not thinking about its meaning or daydreaming. You're simply present with the sound, allowing it to fill your consciousness, to resonate through your body, to radiate out into your environment. Over time, the mantra begins to repeat itself spontaneously in your mind, even when you're not formally practicing. It becomes like a background hum that purifies your mental field and protects you from lower vibrations. The 8th technique is the word of power. This refers to the practice of creating your own personal word or phrase that encapsulates your highest intention, your soul's purpose, your essential nature. This is not a mantra from tradition, but a word that emerges from your own deep connection with your higher self. To create your word of power requires inner work, meditation, contemplation, self-inquiry. You must discover what you truly are beneath all conditioning, what you truly wish to create in this lifetime, what quality most authentically expresses your divine essence. Once you have discovered this word, you work with it in specific ways. You write it in beautiful script or artistic form and place it where you will see it daily. You pronounce it during meditation, charging it with energy and intention. You silently recall it in moments of challenge or confusion, using it to reconnect with your core truth. You speak it aloud in moments of power, like the morning word, but with even greater focus and significance. Your word of power becomes like a spiritual signature, a vibrational key that unlocks your highest potential. The manuscript provides examples of words of power from various adepts: truth speaker, light bearer, heart awakener, bridge builder, peacemaker. These are not descriptions of what the person hopes to become, but declarations of what they essentially are. The word is discovered, not invented. It is recognized as truth, not created as wish. And once recognized and claimed, it becomes a focal point for organizing all of one's energies and actions. The 9th technique is conscious conversation. This is the practice of bringing full hermetic awareness to everyday dialogue. Most people converse mechanically, following habitual patterns, speaking and listening superficially while their minds wander elsewhere. Conscious conversation transforms ordinary interaction into spiritual practice and creative opportunity. In conscious conversation, you enter dialogue with clear intention. You decide beforehand, even if just for a moment, what quality you wish to bring, perhaps presence or curiosity or compassion or truthfulness. During the conversation, you remain aware of your inner state. You notice when ego gets activated, when you start performing rather than being authentic, when you stop truly listening because you're planning your response. You gently return to presence, to genuine interest in the other, to speaking from your center rather than your surface. You also work consciously with the principles we've explored. You use bridge words to help yourself or the other move along polarities. You notice rhythms in the conversation and time your most important points for moments of maximum receptivity. You balance masculine and feminine, sometimes speaking your truth clearly, masculine, and sometimes creating receptive space for the other to discover their own truth, feminine. You remember that your words are causes that will produce effects, and you choose those causes consciously. Conscious conversation is challenging because it goes against deeply ingrained habits, but with practice, it becomes natural, and its effects are remarkable. Your conversations become more meaningful, more productive, more enjoyable. People feel genuinely met by you, and they respond by showing up more authentically themselves. Conflicts resolve more easily because you're not just defending positions, but actually communicating. And you become known as someone whose words matter, whose presence is valuable, who contributes wisdom to any discussion. The 10th technique is the sacred script. This is the practice of writing as a form of word magic. The manuscript explains that writing is not merely a way to record speech, but a distinct form of verbal creation with its own particular power. When you write words consciously, you are creating energetic imprints that persist in time and space. A written word can be read and reread, each time activating its creative power. A written word can reach people you will never meet, extending your verbal influence across vast distances of time and space. The sacred script practice involves approaching writing with the same consciousness you bring to important speech. Before writing something significant, you center yourself, clarify your intention, connect with higher guidance. As you write, you remain aware that you are creating, not just transcribing thoughts. You choose each word carefully, feeling its weight and power. You reread and revise, not just for clarity of communication, but to ensure energetic coherence and alignment with truth. Some adepts keep a sacred journal where they write daily, not as diary of events, but as space for dialogue with their higher self, for clarifying intentions, for capturing insights, for working through challenges. This writing is not for any audience, but serves as a way of using the word to organize consciousness and manifest understanding. Other adepts write texts intended to teach, inspire, or heal others, approaching this writing as sacred service, as way of extending blessing through written word. The manuscript warns that just as spoken words create karma, so do written words, sometimes even more powerfully because they persist and multiply. Therefore, the sacred script must be approached with even greater care than speech. You must be willing to stand behind your written words, to take responsibility for their effects. And you must write truthfully, for written lies or distortions create thought forms that can haunt you and others for long periods. Chapter 20. As we approach the conclusion of these teachings on the creative word, the manuscript addresses the ultimate purpose and highest application of all these techniques: the transformation of the practitioner into what the Hermetic tradition calls the living word, or the word made flesh. This represents the culmination of the path. It is the state where you no longer merely use words consciously, but where you have become so aligned with the Logos, the divine creative word, that your entire being becomes an expression of that word. You don't just speak truth, you embody it. You don't just pronounce blessings, you are a blessing. Your very presence, even in silence, communicates and creates at the highest levels. The manuscript explains that this transformation occurs gradually through years or even decades of dedicated practice. You cannot force it or achieve it through technique alone. It requires the complete integration of all the principles and practices, along with profound spiritual development in all areas of life. But it is the natural fruition of the path, the destiny of all who sincerely walk it. The signs of this transformation are recognizable. The person who has become the living word speaks rarely, but with immense impact. Their words are simple, clear, unadorned by rhetoric, yet they carry transformative power. They don't need to convince or persuade. Truth speaks through them with such evident authority that it is self-evident. They listen more than they speak, and their listening is so complete that people feel truly heard, often for the first time in their lives. Such a person has transcended the duality between word and silence. They experience them as one continuum, two aspects of the same reality. In their speech is silence, a quality of stillness and depth that makes their words pregnant with meaning. In their silence is speech, a quality of aliveness and communication that makes their presence eloquent. They have achieved the sacred marriage of masculine and feminine aspects of the word. The manuscript tells of the great sages and masters of antiquity who embodied this state. It describes how people would travel vast distances just to be in their presence, because simply being near such a being was transformative. The master might speak or might remain silent, might teach explicitly or through enigmatic stories, but always the effect was the same. Consciousness was elevated, truth was revealed, healing occurred. The master had become a walking embodiment of the Logos, a human incarnation of the divine creative principle. But the manuscript also emphasizes that this highest attainment is not reserved for a few exceptional souls. It is the potential of every human being, the destiny we are all moving toward, whether we know it consciously or not. The teachings on the creative word are offered not to create an elite of verbal magicians, but to remind all humans of their divine inheritance and to provide practical means for claiming that inheritance. The path requires courage because it demands that you take full responsibility for your creative power. It requires honesty because you must see clearly the ways you have been using words unconsciously or destructively. It requires humility because you must acknowledge that you don't yet know how to wield this power masterfully and must become a perpetual student. And it requires persistence because the transformation is gradual and there will be many moments of apparent failure or regression. But the path also offers immediate rewards. From the very first day you begin working consciously with your words, you will notice changes. Your words will have more impact, your relationships will improve, your internal state will become more coherent and peaceful. Your capacity to create the life you truly desire will increase. These are not distant promises, but immediate experiences that reinforce your practice and motivate continued dedication. The manuscript concludes with a final practice called the dedication. This is a formal ceremony where you consciously commit yourself to the path of the word. You might perform it alone or with witnesses in a sacred space or in nature, but you perform it with full solemnity and awareness of its significance. You speak your commitment aloud, something like, I dedicate myself to the conscious use of the word. I commit to speaking truth, to blessing rather than cursing, to creating rather than destroying with my speech. I accept responsibility for all the words I have spoken and all the words I will speak. I open myself to the guidance of the Logos, the divine word that speaks universes into existence. I pledge to use my verbal power in service of love, wisdom, and the highest good of all beings. I acknowledge that I am made in the image of the Creator, and that through my words, I participate in the ongoing creation. May my words be aligned with divine will. May my speech serve the light. May I become the living word. After speaking this dedication, you enter a period of silence, allowing the words to settle into your being, to be received by all levels of your consciousness. This silence might last minutes, hours, or even days. When you emerge from it and speak again, you speak as someone who has consciously claimed their power and responsibility as a creator through the word. The manuscript's final words are these: "The word is the most ancient magic and the most powerful. Before all things, the word existed. Through the word, all things came into being. And in the end, when the cosmic cycle completes, all things will return to the word, to the eternal silence that is the source of all sound, to the infinite potential from which all creation emerges and to which it returns. You who have read these teachings, you have been called. The word has spoken to you through these pages, inviting you to remember what you have always known but had forgotten. That you are not merely a speaker of words, but a creator through words, not merely a biological organism, but a divine being with power to shape reality through conscious speech. The question now is not whether you have this power. You do by the very fact of your humanity. The question is whether you will accept it, develop it, use it wisely. Whether you will remain an unconscious speaker, randomly creating through mechanical habits of speech, or become a conscious master of the word, deliberately creating in alignment with your highest truth and purpose. The path has been shown. The techniques have been shared. The principles have been illuminated. What remains is practice, dedication, transformation. Begin now. Begin with the next word you speak. Let it be conscious, intentional, aligned with truth. And then the next word and the next. Day by day, word by word, you will transform. You will become what you were always meant to be, a living embodiment of the Logos, a human through whom the divine word speaks itself into ever more beautiful manifestation. May the blessings of Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great, guide your path. May the power of the creative word awaken fully within you, and may your words become instruments of light, healing, and conscious evolution for yourself and all beings. Thus ends the manuscript of Hermes Trismegistus on the creative word, ancient wisdom for eternal transformation. Hidden knowledge now revealed, power long dormant now offered to all who have the courage to claim it and the dedication to wield it wisely. The word awaits. The silence listens. The path opens before you. Speak and create. Be silent and receive. Become the word and know yourself as divine.